Greetings, everyone. I'm Doug Howard.
And I'm Bill Cahn. Doug, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got where you are?
Well, this year I'm celebrating 50 years as a symphonic percussionist. I began in 1971 as a timpanist and percussionist with the U.S. Air Force Concert Band, and then I played one season with the Louisville Orchestra, followed by 43 years as principal percussionist of the Dallas Symphony. Um, and I also was a founding member of the world music percussion group in Dallas called D-Drum, and been playing with that group. We played together for almost 30 years, and I'm also blessed to have been part of two wonderful music festivals each summer at the Aspen Music Festival and in Door County, Wisconsin, the Peninsula Festival. That's my playing career. And what about you, Bill? What tell us about your work in the symphonic field and your work with NEXUS?
As a student in Philadelphia, I got to see the Philadelphia Orchestra many times for free when I was in high school. It was one of the benefits of the Philadelphia Orchestra's education program. Two of the members of the Philadelphia Orchestra, Dan Hinger and Alan Abel, with whom I studied um, at that time, were also graduates of the Eastman School, and they supported my application to Eastman. I could never have afforded to go, but I got a scholarship to Eastman, graduated from Eastman in percussion, and immediately upon graduating, I married my wife, Ruth, who was also a percussionist at Eastman. And we immediately had an opening in the Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra. I won the principal percussion position. That would have been in 1968. And I served as the principal percussionist there, along with Ruth in the percussion section until 1995, when I retired from the orchestra because I had been performing with NEXUS already by 95 for over 20 years. Like you, Doug, I was able to play in a major symphony orchestra and at the same time play in a major percussion ensemble throughout my career. With that being said, uh, Doug, could you address some of the questions that were raised for us to discuss today?
One of the questions is about the benefits of working in the symphonic field, um, and I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
Okay, I'll be happy to start. Uh, there's no greater blessing, I think, than to wake up in the morning and know that you're going to be spending 5 hours a day with some of the great minds of Western civilization, surrounded by the incredible sound of a symphony orchestra playing all of the great repertoire. There's nothing better than that. And to have had 25 years to 30 years of doing that, what more can you say? It's just wonderful. Um, the other blessing with all of that is you're being paid to do it. And that's really fantastic, especially being a musician. And the music field is very difficult. And today, symphony orchestras are much more competitive than they were when I was a student. However, the issues were always the same and still are the same. You've got to produce, you've got to get up in the morning when you're feeling terrible, and you've got to go into work, and you've got to join into that great world of sound and ideas and be ready to deliver, regardless of how you're feeling and regardless of what you had for breakfast or all of those other things. And that's really wonderful. So let me toss it back to you.
Well, for me, I got into the symphonic world because I was already a drummer, and at about age 16, I was introduced to classical music, and it really grabbed me. And I didn't even know at that point that it would be possible to have a career as a symphonic musician. But I was very fortunate that the time I spent with the Air Force Concert Band helped me prepare for the job that I had later. And but I agree with you. It is such a joy to be surrounded on stage with all of those amazing musicians in an orchestra, and the sounds and the teamwork that goes on in that situation. I think a symphony orchestra is an amazing thing. The way we work together, and everyone is pulling for something greater than each individual in the orchestra. One of the questions is about personal and financial expectations. You have any thoughts on that?
I had absolutely no expectations when I was hired. You and I both matured in the symphony world as the symphony world itself was maturing, because there were very few full year-round opportunities to play in an orchestra when I was auditioning. In Rochester, we had 38 weeks. That was it. And then the summers were off, without pay. And we had to find other things to do in the summer, teaching, maybe going to music festivals. And it sounds like from your reporting that you were in the Peninsula Festival and had done stuff out at Aspen, that was part of your background too.
Well, it was, those were things that were more, I guess I would say I did those things for the love of doing them, certainly not for the compensation, but the opportunity to play with different colleagues, wonderful musicians in their own right, in a different location, and certainly out of the Dallas heat was very attractive. Tell us about your time, how you got started with NEXUS and how that developed, and how did your symphonic career and NEXUS, how did that work?
Well, let me back up a little bit. When we joined the orchestra, Ruth and I were both involved with the orchestra. We had that talk about having a family, because that's a very important consideration. A lot of times people don't think about it. We gave it a lot of thought, especially Ruth. And we decided that we wanted to focus on our careers and that we would forestall having a family, the decision about that, down the road. That enabled us to be very free in a lot of ways. And one of those freedoms enabled me to consider playing with my colleagues in NEXUS and forming an ensemble, which we did on the side. Now, all of us in NEXUS were already playing in orchestras. John Wire and Robin Engelman at that time were timpanist and principal percussionists in the Toronto Symphony. Russell Hartenberger had just left the Air Force Band, and at the invitation of John Wire, moved to Toronto and began teaching at the university. And Bob Becker, leaving the Marine Band and leaving his graduate studies here in Rochester, and continuing to study in Middletown, Connecticut, and world music, also moved to Toronto. We had a clause in our master agreement that enabled anyone in the orchestra to take time off up to 8 weeks in a year. And that was what got me through the first 25 years of NEXUS, is my ability to confidently take a time off from the orchestra, knowing that Ruth was going to be subbing for principal and that she could do the job as well, if not better than I could, and that would be taken care of. And at the same time, I'd still have the freedom to have the balance of working in a high-level chamber group as well as a high-level symphony orchestra. So that's how it pretty much worked through my time in the Philharmonic. In '95, I decided that NEXUS had a lot of opportunities, and that's when I decided to retire from the orchestra and devote full time to NEXUS, which I've done until the present day. So, Doug, what was your story?
Well, we formed our D-drum group in 1990, and it was shortly after the opening of the new Symphony Hall in Dallas, the Meyerson Symphony Center, and what that provided for us was a place that we could meet and rehearse, something that we really had not been able to do. And we got together initially with no thoughts of performing. It was just a group of percussionists and friends who wanted to explore some music that first thing we did was we learned, we studied Gahu drumming from a book. We were learning it from a book, and after a while, we realized that we needed to start doing, being more creative and doing our own music, creating our own music, which we did, so we would meet once a week. It was our bowling night, sort of Monday night. We were drumming night, and so it did not interfere at first with the orchestra. we did run into some problems later on once we started performing a little bit more. But we did not do the kind of touring and concertizing around the world that you in Nexus did, although Nexus was certainly an inspiration to us when we started our group. That, in fact, I remember a conversation when you were in Dallas one time, and we had a little reception at our house, and I was talking to Ed Smith, a member of the drum, and this was before we had organized. I said, Ed, we really should start playing together, and so you provided the spark to bring our group together. For me personally, all my training was in kind of symphonic, Western music, symphonic percussion, and there were a lot of skills that I did not have that I needed to learn to play with the drum group. For instance, I'd never done much hand drumming. I'd never played on any gamelan instruments, and we did a lot of gamelan music. So I was frustrated at times that I didn't have more time to learn new skills because of the orchestra job. But somehow we were able to strike a balance.
When we started out, all of us, except for Michael Creighton early on, who joined immediately the season or two after Nexus was formed, but all the rest of us had classical sensibilities. We were trained classically. We had played in orchestras and chamber ensembles. And one of the things that brought us together was our common interest in the emotional response to classical music, especially orchestral music. And what we were presumptuous enough to take on was our quixotic task of trying to create percussion music that would in some way capture some of that emotional response. And most of the percussion music that was around in the zeitgeist at that time were like musical clocks or fast rudimental kinds of things, or kind of what would be called kitschy today, but gimmicky kind of music, where the music wasn't really about emotion or anything. It was just about the toys that we were playing as percussion instruments. And we wanted to go deeper than that. And we tried to go deeper than that. And that was, I think, unique. Now, composers like John Cage and Lou Harrison, Edgar Varese, their music was largely passé when we were students, and then largely unknown, although they had tried to do some of the same aesthetic pursuits that we were after when they were younger. So that was the cause of the formation of Nexus. And fortunately, as I said earlier, the orchestral contracts and scheduling permitted us to make the time to have this goal pursued.
I have to tell you, I had the pleasure of introducing the first Nexus performance at PASIC in 1977. And when you finished your concert, I don't think my feet touched the ground for the next 24 hours. It was quite an amazing and moving performance. The pandemic has forced a lot of institutions, including orchestras and chamber music groups, to rethink their model, and there's been a lot of creativity in the last year and a half in terms of getting their programming, their music out to the public. Now, whether or not that's all sustainable is a different question, but we're going to find out the answers going forward, I think.
Well, Doug, this has been a great conversation. I would like to close with your thoughts on your advice to students today who want to play in an orchestra. What would be your main advice to offer?
Well, I think that if that's what you really want to do, you want to prepare as well as you can for that career, but you also have to keep your options open because the competition is so stiff for those jobs, and especially in the big orchestras with the livable salaries. And so what we're seeing today is that students are synthesizing a career really that includes some orchestra playing, some chamber music playing, different facets of the musical world. Teaching is an important element in that. And so I think it's actually more rare to have a job these days as a full-time symphony player. Uh, and I think schools are starting to recognize this. Music schools are offering classes in entrepreneurship and business, music business. So I think you've got to be willing to um, pursue what you want to pursue, but keep your options open.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And also, what I tell students sometimes is even if you're not a professional percussionist, you may still have the opportunity to play in an orchestra. There are community orchestras. There's a very fine medical center orchestra here. Doctors and nurses at the University of Rochester Medical Center have their own orchestra. They pay dues
Yes.
and they hire a conductor who comes in and works with them and they play the repertoire. So you don't have to be a professional. If you want to play professionally, my advice is a little different because it's very competitive today. I think it requires full commitment to this. And so I tell students, don't go to graduate school. My advice is don't go to graduate school, but rather save that money. I know some graduate schools are free, so this is a qualified form of advice, but use your money to build a network. Take lessons with teachers, select which teachers would you like to play with in a section. Take lessons with them, call them up, say, can I come on a Saturday a month from now for a lesson? And what's happening there is not only you getting to know that person, but that person is getting to know you. While you're at that lesson, you can ask a lot of questions. Are there other opportunities here in the community? What do you guys look for when you have an opening? I mean, the sky's the limit on valuable information that you can
Yes.
acquire. And with the same amount of money that if you're paying for graduate school, you could probably hit a dozen of your leading candidates for your leading superstars of percussion and get lessons and valuable information from them, and then use the other time to practice the repertoire. And that means not only practicing your part, but knowing the pieces that you're practicing. How do you fit in with other things? What are the tempos? What does this conductor do with the tempo? What does that conductor do with the tempo? And can you do both? And can you do this can you play that excerpt in 3 different ways?
Yes.
Slower, faster, with different mallets, um, with a different phrasing. Use your time that way, but you have to be a self-teacher to a large extent, at least 50%, maybe more. And you can back up your self-teaching and your ideas with your lessons with these other teachers. And so the college presidents don't like my giving that advice. In fact, I would give the same advice today to not necessarily undergrads, because they don't all necessarily know yet what they want to do, but some do. By the time they're juniors, they know pretty much what touches them, what their strengths are. Now, not everyone, but those who want to be orchestra players generally know by then. And even the last 2 years of college, I would consider alternative, because for all of the years I've played in an orchestra, for all the conductors we've worked for all of the uh, experience that we've had, no one has ever asked whether I had a degree in music, right? So
So true.
the degree is irrelevant. The experience is why you're there, not for the degree. And you can get experience in other places. Now, that's not to say that it's all weighted. Colleges provide instruments, they provide security in a way. And while you're out doing these other things, you've got to take care of yourself. You've got to feed yourself. And so there are a lot of balancing acts that have to happen. But I think the wise student today is thinking bigger picture. And if you have a goal, what it takes to get to that goal. And then I say, give it 5 years. If in 5 years you've been doing this and it hasn't worked, go to plan B. Sometimes it takes longer than that. If you're really dedicated, you can wait longer. But 5 years is an awful long time to be looking. And meanwhile, supporting yourself. I know one player that I know very well who's in a major orchestra today spent much more than 5 years and always coming in second. and you
Yes,
just
he did.
gotta keep going and keep going and keep going, and eventually it'll happen. But the price is you're sacrificing your time in other areas. When you agree to do something, you're also agreeing not to do other things. But it takes that kind of focus.
Well, Bill Cahn, it's always great to see you and to get a chance to talk with you and hear your words of wisdom for our percussion world, and it's just been a pleasure. Thank you.